Okay, so video's running, and I guess this is really happening because y'all are here. So I don't, of course, it's just a video, so I don't know. I guess there'll be people watching later on. But I just want to throw this out there that I have really prayed about this, and I'm humbled, and I'm excited, but I'm nervous because this is new. This is new for our church. This is new for me, and I don't know how this is going to go. I don't know if I'm going to be any good at it. So I have prayed for, and I am asking you all for a little bit of grace until I, see if I can get this figured out. Because I don't know. I mean, I'm excited, and I have really enjoyed studying Jeremiah. I've been studying Jeremiah since last October, and so I've really enjoyed it. And again, I've prayed, and I hope the Lord is gracious in this. I hope that you guys enjoy it, and I hope that we learn together and we grow together. We learn more about the Lord and learn to love Him more. And in the process, I hope that I handle the word of the Lord with reverence and awe and with fear and the caution that it mandates and deserves. And I hope that I'm articulate and to the point. Hope I make sense. And I hope that I handle the large amount of material in a practical and efficient manner. And I hope that I don't make a fool of myself. So there it is. That I can't get any more real than that right there. I hope that I don't make a fool of myself. So those would be my three big things. I want to handle the word of the Lord with integrity. I don't want to make a fool of myself, and I don't want y'all to be bored. So I hope that that would be my hope chest. People still do hope chests. Okay, so with all that, let's get going into Jeremiah. And well, not quite Jeremiah yet, but we're going to get there. So Jeremiah is a book in the Old Testament, and I mean, goodness, why don't we study the Old Testament? We're not under the law anymore. Why don't we just jump right into the New Testament? Because if we're honest, the New Testament is easier to study than the Old Testament, isn't it? I mean, would y'all say that? Yeah. Yeah, I think most people would say that. And I think that that's probably a shortcoming with us, because God didn't just give us a canon that contained the New Testament only. He gave us the full canon that contains the Old Testament, and I think it's His desire that we study and know the whole canon. So, and I think the more we study the Old Testament, and the more we pore over it, and the more we let it steep down into us, I think the easier it gets, and the more lovely it gets, and the more we study the Old Testament, the better we understand the New Testament, because Jesus said that the Old Testament bore witness about Him. And in the book of Luke, he said that everything that was written in the law of Moses and in the prophets and in the Psalms, all that had to be fulfilled. And then on the road to Emmaus, he was talking to those two disciples, and he interpreted all of the scriptures of the things concerning himself. And then a little bit later, when he just disappeared, the two disciples were like, didn't our hearts burn within us when he opened the scriptures to us? And so I think that's why we want to study the Old Testament. We want our hearts to burn within us when we learn more about the Lord Jesus. Okay, so that's kind of the why we study the Old Testament. But what specifically about Jeremiah? Well, we do want we want to know the Lord better. We want God to deepen our understanding of Him so we can endure and persevere in this old, hateful, hurtful, broken mess of a world. We want to cling to the hope of the gospel. We want our faith in God's promises to get stronger, so we can grasp hold of that deeper understanding of who He is and what His purposes are. And that's probably true. That should be true of any book. that we study in the Bible. So more specifically, when I studied Jeremiah, one of the things that I discovered was that Jeremiah gives us a really wide spectrum, not a full spectrum, because nobody can do that and we couldn't comprehend it. But he gives us a really wide spectrum of God's character, his sovereignty, his justice, truthfulness, love, righteous anger, wrath, patience, long-suffering, commitment. And prophetic literature can be difficult because we don't like to talk about a lot of those things. We don't want to talk about God's judgment. We don't want to talk about God's wrath. We like to talk about the nice parts of God. But we need to know about his justice, and we need to know about his wrath. We need to think about his sovereignty and his truthfulness. When I went to the Gospel Coalition Women's Conference, one of the keynote speakers was Melissa Kruger, and she was the first keynote speaker. 5 or 6 minutes into her keynote address, she said one sentence, and that popped out. It was the first thing I wrote down in my little notebook, and that has stuck with me, and I've thought about that several times every day since I heard it. And she said, every single part of God is what you need. So there's nothing about God that we don't need and that we don't need to know about. And so why is that true? Why do we need to know all of, even what we would say the bad stuff? And it's not bad because there's nothing about God that's bad, but humanly speaking, if as a human we have wrath, or we have anger management problems, or that would be bad. So on the flip side in Jeremiah of having a wide spectrum of God's character, Jeremiah also shows us a very wide spectrum of our sinfulness. And it is raw, and it is unfiltered, and it is shocking, and parts of it are gross. And they're breaking those commandments, and they're breaking covenants, and they're brazen about it, and they're unrepentant, and they're unashamed. And there are parts of it, the first time I really started reading through it, that I was embarrassed to read what I was reading. I was embarrassed that Israel had acted that way. And then I thought, gosh, I've acted that way though. Sometimes I do, sometimes I still act that way. And so I need to read Jeremiah to see how God sees my sin, because it's gross, and I need to feel that. I need to feel the weight of that. And so as we study the Old Testament and understand the Old Testament, we gain a better understanding of who God is, but we also understand how desperately we need a Savior. Now, I need to read Jeremiah to be reminded that despite how gross God's people are, despite how gross I am, God continually calls his people to return to him. He promises forgiveness, and he wants restoration, and he wants a relationship. He wants to be near us. You will see in Jeremiah that God is a covenant-keeping God, even when his people are not. And it's in Jeremiah that God tells us that he's going to make a new covenant with his people. And it's going to be different from the other covenants, because this new covenant is going to be written on people's hearts. And his people will know him, and he will be their God, and they will be his people, and he will forgive their iniquities and remember their sins no more. And so this new covenant, it's going to be better. And so in the New Testament, when Christ calls us to himself, it's so much more awesome. And it's so much more amazing. And it's that deep calling to deep. And I'm getting ahead of myself, so hang on. Let me back up a little bit. Okay, so what we're going to do with the rest of the time this evening is we're going to set up what even precipitated the need to call Jeremiah to the office of prophet. Israel was God's chosen covenant people. So what happened? Where do we start? Because there's a lot of history between the garden and King Josiah. And obviously we can't cover everything, so I'm going to point out as we go along here, just a few biblical theology themes that run through the Bible that we see in Jeremiah. And then we're going to take a quick look at the covenants, because like I said, the Lord is a covenant-keeping God. And if you don't have the covenants in the Old Testament, then you really don't have anything. There's nothing to write about. There's nothing to trace. The history doesn't mean anything. So we've got to understand the covenants. And I'm going to try to be brief on the covenants, but they're too important to overlook and assume. So the first thing that we want to do is define covenant. And if you were to Google a definition for covenant, you would find hundreds of definitions of covenants. So I kind of piecemealed a definition together that I thought worked for what we'll be looking at. So covenant is a legal term denoting an oath-bound relationship between two or more parties, declaring benefits to be given by one party to another, with or without conditions attached. I'll say it again. A legal term denoting an oath-bound relationship between two or more parties, declaring benefits to be given by one party to another, with or without conditions attached. So a covenant, and in the Bible you will see there's covenants between countries, there's covenants between people, human to human, king to vassal, and then there's also the covenant between God and humanity, or God and his chosen covenant partner. So we call that a divine covenant, and that is a situation where God binds himself by his own oath to keep his own promises. A situation where God binds himself by his own oath to keep his own promises. And there are two types of covenants used in the Bible: conditional and unconditional. And they're pretty straightforward. Conditional covenants, there are strings attached. It is a this for that type of relationship. If you do this, I will do that. So think of buying a car or buying a house. When you sign that contract, if you make the payments, the bank will give you the deed or the title. And then unconditional covenant is just the opposite. There are no strings attached. There are still two parties, but one party says, it doesn't matter what you do on your end, I'm going to fulfill my part. So the very first covenant that we come to in the Bible, and it's not even actually called the covenant in the Bible, but in my research, John Piper and R.C. Sproul and Don Carson, they all agree that there's enough covenant terminology to call it a covenant. So if it's good enough for those heavy hitters, it's good enough for me to call it a covenant. So the first covenant is the Adamic covenant in Genesis 1. Starts in Genesis 1 and then continues through Genesis 3. But there are two parts to the Adamic covenant. There's the covenant of works. And that includes the cultural mandate. The cultural mandate was built into creation to be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth. And God promised to bless and protect. And in exchange, on the human side, there was to be worship and adoration and obedience. So this was a conditional covenant. There was to be obedience, to not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And then in an instant, Eve makes a bad decision, and Adam follows suit and makes a terrible decision. And they both follow some really bad counsel, and the glorious goodness of the cosmos is fractured. And God has to deal with the sin that has entered the world. So he pronounces some judgments and punishments, and Adam and Eve receive their punishment, and it not only punishes them, but it carries out through their whole line, because Adam was the federal head. He was our representative. So when he fell, all of humanity fell with him. But in Genesis 3:15, God is talking to the serpent, and we get our first tiny little glimmer of God's redemptive plan, and his covenant of grace is established. And he says to the serpent, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers, and he will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. And at that point in the story, that's all they know. And we know the whole story, but then, that's all God, to our knowledge, that's all God said about it. So, somewhere down the line, there's going to be a male offspring of Eve who's going to crush the head of the serpent. And this part of the covenant was unconditional. There was nothing else that Adam and Eve had to do. They had already done their part. And from that point on in the story, we're supposed to be looking for him. We're supposed to be looking for the serpent crusher. And then God kills some animals. And why does God kill the animals? Do you remember?
Is that just a foreshadowing?
Yeah, but what specifically? Why did he kill the animals?
He walks around their neck. Yeah. Is that?
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah. Adam and Eve had tried to cover themselves. Remember, with fig leaves. Yeah. And God says, that's not sufficient covering for you. I will provide the covering for you. And so blood was shed to provide adequate covering for Adam and Eve. Which is a foreshadowing, yeah. So now we can start to trace this theme of sacrifice and atonement and covering throughout the whole of the Bible. He sends Adam and Eve out of the garden. He exiles them. Okay, so now we get a thread called exile. And exile is huge in Jeremiah. All right, so the next covenant is the Noahic covenant. And this one's pretty straightforward. Noah and his family come off the ark. Noah builds an altar. He takes some of the animals. He offers burnt offerings, and it was a pleasing aroma to the Lord. I'm missing a page here. Okay.
Is it the covenant of what?
The Noahic covenant. Noahic. It was a pleasing aroma to the Lord, and when he smelled that pleasing aroma, that's when he said, he made the covenant, and he promised never to destroy the earth again in the flood.
So is the second, because we have Abrahamic covenant.
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's next in line.
Yeah, so we were confused that you were talking about.
Oh.
So is part B on the number 4, is that the,
Covenant of grace.
Covenant of grace.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Covenant of grace.
So we don't have the no.
Yeah, but I didn't put the Noahic
that's
covenant
fine.
on there because it's
Well, you're throwing
short
us.
and
Okay.
yeah, pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So then we get to the Abrahamic covenant, and this was a covenant that the Lord made with a man named Abram. The book of Joshua tells us that he was an idol worshiper. He and his father were idol worshipers, but this was the man that God chose to set his favor on, that will ultimately help springboard the blessing or the promise made back in Genesis 3:15. So there are 3 parts to the Abrahamic covenant. God promises Abram land and people and a blessing. And God says this blessing is going to be a worldwide blessing through Abraham, through Abraham's descendants. The whole world was going to be blessed. And so it's in Genesis. Turn to it real quick. It's in Genesis 12, where God first makes the promise. And then in Genesis 17, a few years have passed since Genesis 12, and Abraham still doesn't have, God promised him people. And Abraham still doesn't have any children. So he has this conversation with the Lord, because the Lord comes back to him and says, remember, your blessing is going to be great. And Abraham says, okay, but Lord, I still don't have any children, and one of my servants is going to get my inheritance. And God says, no, he's not. You're going to have your own child. And it says, Abraham believed the Lord, and the Lord counted that to him as righteousness. And then in the very next sentence, God just reiterates what he just said. He said, if you can count the stars, that's how many descendants you're going to be. And Abraham says, Lord, how do I know that? And I think that's probably one of the most beautiful series of verses in the book of Genesis, because we know that Abraham had been counted righteous, but he still had some wrestle in it, because God hadn't, in Abraham's mind, God hadn't fulfilled what he said. And Abraham said, Lord, I believe you, but how do I know? And I think, oh man, thank you, Lord, for including that little tidbit, because I have wrestled. How's it going to happen? How are you going to fulfill what you say? Because this world looks bleak, and Abraham's world looked bleak. He was 99. He didn't think he had any children in it. And so Abraham says, Lord, how do I know? And so God said, here's how you're going to know. Go get me some animals. So Abraham goes and gets him some animals. And I thought it was interesting that Abraham knew exactly what to do with these animals. He didn't have to ask the Lord. It seems strange to us, because he cuts the animals in half and he lays them open, each side. And, we don't operate like that, but Abraham knew exactly what was going on. This was how you cut a covenant with someone. And if someone had been watching Abraham prepare these animals, they would have said, oh, he's about to cut a covenant with somebody. They would have known. And normally, when you cut these covenants, and there's two people involved, both parties walk through the river of blood that has been created when you cut these animals open. And basically what you're saying is, if I don't fulfill my part of this promise, then do to me what's been done to these animals. And normally both parties would walk through the river of blood. But what happens in Genesis 17? Who passes through the river of blood? Only God. This was an unconditional promise to Abraham. It wasn't dependent on Abraham's obedience. It wasn't dependent on whether Abraham was a good guy or not. And you say, well, where do you get that? How do you know that? Because God is the only one who put his life on the line. Where's Abraham in the story? Y'all remember? He's asleep. God makes a deep sleep come upon him, just like he made with Adam. And Abraham is asleep through the whole ceremony and sees it in a vision. There's no promises extracted from him. There's nothing that he has to do. Now there's a sign given later on, the sign of circumcision, but that was just the sign to say that you were part of the covenant, just like the rainbow given to Noah was the sign. So whenever we see the rainbow, we know that we're included in that covenant. That was the sign. Okay. So, what did God promise Abraham? People? land, and a worldwide blessing. Okay, so that's going to be important as you get into Jeremiah. All right, the Mosaic covenant. Is that where we? Yep. All right. So the Mosaic covenant is in Exodus 19 through 24. It's the covenant made with the new national Israel. They've been birthed into a new nation, and they're coming out of 400 years of slavery in Egypt, and they don't know how to live as their own society. All they have known is hardship and taskmasters and slavery and idolatry. They know that there is a God of their fathers, a God of Abraham, and a God of Isaac, and a God of Jacob, but they are so far removed from any kind of relationship with him. They don't know how to worship him. They don't know him. And so God has just shown them who he is. He is sovereign even over Pharaoh, who held himself up as a god. He was sovereign over all of the Egyptians' gods. He has delivered them. He wants them to know that he governs all things and that they are to look to him and worship only him. And in Exodus 19, he tells them the plans that he has for them. Exodus 19:4. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you fully obey me and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And all the people responded, we will do everything that the Lord has said. Okay. So then in Exodus 20 through 23, they're given the law, which includes the 10 Commandments. And the 10 Commandments are the foundation of the covenant. They were the basic laws that the people had to obey, the basic principles that they had to obey. And it was never meant to save them, but it was supposed to set them apart from the other nations. And they were supposed to look different and act different from everyone else. And then in Exodus 24, the covenant is confirmed. And Moses went and told the people all the Lord's words and laws, and they responded with one voice, everything the Lord says we will do. And Moses got up early the next morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and set up 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. He sent young Israelite men, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as fellowship offerings to the Lord. And Moses took half the blood and put it in bowls, and the other half he splashed on the altar. And then he took the book of the covenant and read it to the people, and they responded for the third time, we will do everything the Lord has said. We will obey. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, this is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance to all these words. So this covenant is different from the Abrahamic covenant and the Noahic covenant and the covenant of grace. This is another conditional covenant. There are stipulations. If you obey me fully and keep my commandments, God is very clear. There were no gray areas. Those were the terms. If you keep it, I will bless you. If you don't keep it, it doesn't make it void, but there are consequences. They wander around in the wilderness for 40 years because they're stubborn and hard-hearted. And so the first generation dies off because God said they won't enter my promised land. And then we get to the book of Deuteronomy. And Deuteronomy is like, it's Moses' last great stand. So he preaches to the 2Gs, the second gen people, and they're grown up and they're standing on the brink of entering the promised land. And Moses reiterates the law to the second generation. He recounts the entire story to them about how they were stubborn and hard-hearted, and that's why they had to wander in the wilderness, and they fought battles, and they grumbled, and they had bad attitudes. In chapter 4, he starts getting into the law. He recounts the 10 Commandments again, and we get another listing of them in Deuteronomy. He talks about avoiding idolatry. I'm going to go through the book of Deuteronomy really fast here. He reminds them that they're a chosen people, and it's not by any righteousness on their part that God is doing this for them. Then in chapters 11 and 12, he's very clear that when they enter the land, they are to tear down the altars of the false gods and worship the Lord only. And he tells them how to worship, and he tells them where to worship. And he warns about false prophets, which we're going to see in Jeremiah. He gives them instructions about clean and unclean food, sabbatical year, feasts. He revisits idolatry again. And in chapter 17, this was interesting, he gives laws concerning Israel's kings. But Israel doesn't have any kings. But God knew. And so in 17:16, he says, the king, moreover, must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself, or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them. For the Lord has told you, you are not to go back that way again. And that's important. Then we get the hangman's curse, we get laws on sexual immorality, we get laws on divorce, and then we get to Deuteronomy 28. And as plain as it gets, he lays out the blessings for obedience and the curses, God's word, curses for disobedience. And when you read this passage, it is astounding how you can trace these blessings and curses throughout the remainder of the Old Testament. When national Israel is living upright and obedient lives, they flourish. When they have fallen into sin and idolatry and are out of fellowship with God, there's judgment. And you can literally trace this thread throughout the tapestry of the Old Testament. And if you'll read it through, if you'll read all of the Old Testament, the historical books, the prophets, you will see, if you'll read it through these lenses, you'll be able to trace Deuteronomy 28. So we're going to read Deuteronomy 28. So buckle up. How many of you?
Looks like some of the curses might start in Deuteronomy 27 at the very end. Is that kind of where it starts?
We're gonna stick with 28. It actually, yeah, it probably does, and then there's also some more in 29.
Okay.
But I think we're gonna get enough of it in 28.
Yeah.
Okay. So Deuteronomy 28, blessings for obedience. And if you faithfully obey the voice of the Lord your God, being careful to do all his commandments that I command you today, the Lord your God will set you high above the nations of the earth, and all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you, if you obey the voice of the Lord your God. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the field. Okay, city and field, town and country. Blessed shall be the fruit of your womb, and the fruit of your ground, and the fruit of your cattle, the increase of your herds, and the young of your flock. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out. And the Lord will cause your enemies who rise against you to be defeated before you. They shall go out against you one way, and they shall flee in seven. The Lord will command the blessing on you in your barns and in all that you undertake. And he will bless you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. The Lord will establish you as a people holy to himself, as he has sworn to you, if you keep the commandments of the Lord your God and walk in his ways. And all the peoples of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they shall be afraid of you. And the Lord will make you abound in prosperity, in the fruit of your womb, and in the fruit of your livestock, and in the fruit of your ground, within the land that the Lord swore to your fathers to give you. The Lord will open to you his good treasury, the heavens, to give the rain to your land in its season, and to bless all the work of your hands. And you shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. And the Lord will make you the head and not the tail, and you shall only go up and not down, if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you today, being careful to do them. And if you do not turn aside from any of the words that I command you today, to the right hand or to the left, to go after other gods to serve them. Okay, that sounds pretty good. Did he leave anything out? All right. Curses for disobedience, verse 15. But if you do not obey the voice of the Lord your God, or be careful to do all his commandments and his statutes that I command you today, then all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. Cursed shall you be in the city, and cursed shall you be in the field. Cursed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Cursed shall be the fruit of your womb and the fruit of your ground, the increase of your herds, the young of your flock. Cursed shall you be when you go in, and cursed shall you be when you go out. Okay, so he's just undone all of the blessings. He's not done. The Lord will send curses on you, confusion and frustration in all that you undertake to do, until you are destroyed and perish quickly on account of the evil of your deeds, because you have forsaken me. The Lord will make the pestilence stick to you until he has consumed you off the land that you are entering to take possession of it. The Lord will strike you with wasting disease, and with fever, inflammation, and fiery heat, and with drought, and with blight, and with mildew. And they shall pursue you until you perish, and the heavens over your head shall be bronze, and the earth under you shall be iron. No rain. The Lord will make the rain of your land powder. From heaven dust shall come down on you until you are destroyed. The Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You shall go out one way against them, and you shall flee 7 ways before them. You shall be a horror to all the kingdoms of the earth, and your dead body shall be food for all the birds of the air, for the beasts of the earth, and there shall be no one to frighten them away. The Lord will strike you with all the boils of Egypt, with tumors and scabs and itch of which you cannot be healed. The Lord will strike you with madness and blindness and confusion of mind, and you shall grope at noonday as the blind grope in darkness, and you shall not prosper in your ways. You shall only be oppressed and robbed continually, and there shall be no one to help you. You shall betroth a wife, but another man shall ravish her. You shall build a house, but you shall not dwell in it. You shall plant a vineyard, but you shall not enjoy its fruit. Your ox shall be slaughtered before your eyes, but you shall not eat any of it. Your donkey shall be seized before your face, but shall not be restored to you. Your sheep shall be given to your enemies, but there shall be no one to help you. Your sons and your daughters will be given to another people, while your eyes look on and fail with longing for them all day long. But you shall be helpless. A nation you have not known shall eat up the fruit of your ground and of all your labors, and you shall only be oppressed and crushed continually, so that you are driven mad by the sights that your eyes see. The Lord will strike you on the knees and on the legs with grievous boils, of which you cannot be healed, from the sole of your feet to the crown of your head. I mean, my goodness. The Lord will bring you and your king, of whom you set over you, to a nation that neither you nor your fathers have known. And there you shall serve other gods of wood and stone, and you shall become a horror, a proverb, and a byword among all the peoples, where the Lord will lead you away. You shall carry much seed into the field, and you shall gather in little, for the locust shall consume it. You shall plant vineyards and dress them, but you shall neither drink of the wine nor gather the grapes, for the worms shall eat them. You shall have olive trees throughout all your territory, but you shall not anoint yourself with oil, for your olives will drop off. You shall father sons and daughters, but they shall not be yours, for they shall go into captivity. The cricket shall possess all your trees, the fruit of your ground, and the fruit of your ground. The sojourner who is among you shall rise higher and higher above you, and you shall come down lower and lower. He shall lend to you, and you shall not lend to him. He shall be the head, and you shall be the tail. Okay, we're getting the point. All these curses shall come upon you and pursue you and overtake you till you are destroyed, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord your God to keep his commandments and his statutes that he commanded you. They shall be a sign and a wonder against you and your offspring forever, because you did not serve the Lord your God with joyfulness and gladness of heart, because of the abundance of all things. Therefore you shall serve your enemies, whom the Lord will send against you, in hunger and thirst and nakedness, lacking everything, and he will put a yoke of iron on your neck till he has destroyed you. The Lord will bring a nation against you from far away, from the end of the earth, swooping down like an eagle, a nation whose language you do not understand, a hard-faced nation who shall not respect the old or show mercy to the young. It shall eat the offspring of your cattle and the fruit of your ground until you are destroyed. It shall also not leave you grain, wine, or oil, the increase of your herds or the young of your flock, until they have caused you to perish. Keep going. They shall besiege you in all your towns until your high and fortified walls in which you trusted come down throughout all your land. They shall besiege you in all your towns and throughout all your land which the Lord your God has given you. And you shall eat the fruit of your womb, the flesh of your sons and daughters, whom the Lord your God has given you in the siege and in the distress with which your enemies shall distress you. It gets worse. The man who is the most tender and refined among you will begrudge food to his brother, to the wife he embraces, and to the last of his children whom he has left, so that he will not give to any of them any of the flesh of his children whom he is eating, because he has nothing left in the siege and in the distress with which your enemy shall distress you in all your towns. The most tender and refined woman among you, who would not venture to set the sole of her foot on the ground because she is so delicate and tender, will begrudge to her husband she embraces, to her son and her daughter, her afterbirth that comes out from between her feet, and her children whom she bears, because lacking everything, she will eat them secretly in the siege and in the distress with which your enemies shall distress you and your towns. Y'all want me to stop? Let's keep going. If you're not careful to do all the words of this law that are written in this book, that you may fear this glorious and awesome name, the Lord your God, then the Lord will bring on you and your offspring extraordinary afflictions severe and lasting, and sicknesses grievous and lasting. He will bring upon you again all the diseases of Egypt, which you are afraid, and they shall cling to you. Every sickness also and every affliction that is not recorded in the book of this law, the Lord will bring upon you until you are destroyed. There's more that they don't even know about. Whereas you are numerous as the stars of heaven, you will be left few in number, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord your God. And as the Lord took delight in doing you good and multiplying you, so the Lord will take delight in bringing ruin upon you and destroying you. You shall be plucked off the land that you are entering to take possession of it. The Lord will scatter you among all the peoples, from one end of the earth to the other, and there you shall serve other gods of wood and stone, which neither you or your fathers have known. Among these nations you shall find no respite. There shall be no resting place for the sole of your foot. But the Lord will give you there a trembling heart and failing eyes and a languishing soul. Your life shall hang in doubt before you. Night and day shall be in dread and have no assurance of life. In the morning you shall say, oh, if only it were evening. And at evening you shall say, oh, only it were morning, because of the dread that your heart shall feel and the sights that your eyes will see. And the Lord will bring you back to ships to Egypt, a journey that I promised that you should never make again. There you shall offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves, but there will be no buyer. My goodness. Would that not deter you? Would that not put the fear of God in you? Like I say, it couldn't get any more plain. And after Deuteronomy, you've got Joshua and Judges and Ruth. And the next time you read through these books, read through them with the lenses of Deuteronomy 28 and see if you can't see it. See if you don't understand it better. In fact, real quick, let's just read Ruth 1:1. Ruth 1:1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and 2 sons. Okay, what do we know from Ruth 1:1? What time was it? the time of the judges, when we know that everybody did what they thought was right in their own eyes. And there was that cycle of idolatry and then oppression, and then they would cry out to the Lord, and he would raise up a judge, and the judge would deliver them, and then the Lord would restore the land. But what does it say in Ruth 1:1? There was a famine in the land. So right off the bat, we know that we're in that cycle of disobedience. And the man left the town of Bethlehem, which the irony of that is Bethlehem means house of bread. There was a famine in the land of the house of bread. Okay, and then if we jump down to verse 6, it says, "Then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and had given them food." So what does that tell us?
That was a blessing, not a curse, but when he blessed them.
Yeah, so so they had returned to the Lord, they had repented.
Repentance.
Yes, there was repentance, and the Lord was blessing him. So right off the bat in Ruth, you can start to see that cycle. Yeah. Okay, then we get 1 Samuel, and in 1 Samuel 8, the people reject the Lord, and they want their own king, just like the nations. And they choose Saul, who was unbelievably disappointing. And then after Saul, we get David, and David was God's chosen man. And David gets his own covenant. And in 2 Samuel 7, David says that he's going to build God a house. And God says, "You're going to build me a house?" No, but I'm going to build you a house. And God promises David that a descendant of David would reign on the throne of Israel throughout all eternity. And so if you pull that thread of the Abrahamic covenant, you'll find that these two threads get woven together, because the promise of a Davidic king becomes the king through whom God will secure the promise to Abraham of a land and of descendants and of a blessing. So you can start to see how these themes weave themselves together. And then David's son Solomon reigns after him, and then this is the golden era of Israel's history. There's peace, there's wealth. Solomon rules with wisdom. The wealth is unfathomable. The wealth is so wealthy that silver is basically worthless during the time of Solomon. But enjoy Solomon for his 3 or 4 or 5 chapters that he gets, because it all goes sideways. As wise as Solomon is, he makes some bad decisions that lead him away from the Lord. Some bad decisions that directly go against the laws for the kings that we read back in Deuteronomy. And then Solomon's son, Rehoboam, follows in his footsteps, and he makes some terrible decisions, and he follows some really bad counsel, and the glorious kingdom is fractured. He makes bad decisions, he follows bad counsel, and the kingdom is fractured. Does that sound familiar? So between Saul and David and Solomon, Israel has a united kingdom for about 120 years. And then in the reign of Rehoboam, the kingdom divides. And it's northern Israel and southern Judah. Northern Israel lasts about 208 years. And then it gets swept away by Assyria because of their blatant idolatry. And they didn't heed the word of the prophets that God sent them. Southern kingdom of Judah gets to go on a little bit longer. They last altogether about 340 years, about 134, 35 years longer than the northern kingdom. But they just sink deeper and deeper into the abyss of idolatry. And towards the end of the southern kingdom, about 640 BC, little King Josiah takes the throne. And in Josiah's 13th year, Jeremiah gets his prophetic calling about 627 BC. And that's how we open the book of Jeremiah. So there are some challenges with Jeremiah. And we were talking a little bit about these before we started. But I think the first challenge is just the length of it. It's long. It's the longest book of the Bible. Now, chapter-wise, Isaiah has more chapters, and obviously Psalms have more chapters. But word-wise, Jeremiah is longer. Jeremiah is 5.2% of the Bible. So you're about to undertake a studying in 13 weeks of 5.2% of the Bible. So it's just long. But I can tell you that as many times as I've read it now, it doesn't seem quite so long to me. So maybe that's key. Maybe you just gotta read it over and over and over. And then like we talked about, it's not in chronological order. So you get the first 10 chapters, and scholars think probably all of those 10 chapters happened during the reign of King Josiah. King Josiah is only mentioned once in those chapters, but pretty solid agreement that probably those were all written during King Josiah's reign. And then after that, he just skips around and jumps around. And I came across an article, and then it had a podcast that went with it. So I read the article, I listened to the podcast, and their argument was that the reason that Jeremiah is put together that way is it's one giant chiasm. You remember what a chiasm is? Okay, so a chiasm is it's a set of thoughts that come together, and it has a central point, and then the thoughts after it mirror the thoughts above it. Okay, so I'm trying to think. So it'd be like if when God created the heavens and the earth, and then sin crept in, and God had to exile Adam and Eve, and then so exile Adam and Eve would be the central point, and then in the next chapter, Cain kills Abel, so that's the sin that has crept in, so it matches, and then Cain gets exiled. So the central point, everything that's top to bottom, it mirrors. You could lay it over on top of each other. So I think that Jeremiah is one big chiasm, and that the central point of it is the new covenant. So as we read, and like I said, I haven't had time to examine that and really check that out, but there were, they had lots and lots and lots of scripture references. So maybe that's just for fun. Maybe I'll print that off for you and bring that for you on Sunday, and then that's something that you can take a look at as you're reading through it. I think another challenge in Jeremiah is there are a lot of characters. There are a lot of kings that you have to keep straight. So that's why I kind of gave you that sheet that lists out the kings and what order they were. And sometimes they're called by one name, and sometimes they're called by another name. So I gave you both of those names. And then prophetic literature is just hard. So there are three main themes always in prophetic literature. So again, as you're reading any book of the prophets, this might help you. It's always going to be sin, judgment, restoration. Sin, judgment, restoration. So if you can follow those themes as you're reading through any prophet, maybe that'll make it a little bit more clear to you. Some of Jeremiah's contemporaries were Ezekiel, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, and Daniel. And if I read Ezekiel for Lent, and I noticed that there were a lot of overlapping themes that crossed over in Ezekiel and Jeremiah. So that was pretty neat to see. And then the timeline for Jeremiah, after the death of King Josiah, Judah lasts less than 25 years. And then they're swept away by Babylon. Jeremiah prophesies for about 40 years. He gets a little bit of time with King Josiah, and then the rest of the time he gets, and it's just this procession of kings. And we'll get to it. In fact, I call two of the lessons, I think I call it a parade of kings. And he'll jump back and forth. King Zedekiah, King Jehoiachin, King Jehoiakim, King Zedekiah, King Shalom. And so he just jumps back and forth. So keep that timeline handy. Ooh, excuse me. And maybe that will just help you kind of keep your place as to where you are in the story. And then we will start with chapter 1 on Sunday. So, any questions? Did it make sense?
It's good.
Okay, so I'll turn this off now. Bye.